Hey there, everybody. We're so sorry you can't see us right now, but we're having a little bit of camera issues getting the camera to connect to the system. But we do want to still get you guys your weekly Facebook Live. So we're going to go ahead and do this video or picture style, audio style. Hopefully you enjoy the melodious voices of Brooke and I.
Ooh, melodious.
If you don't, I'm sorry. They're what we have. But we did want to bring the conversation this week about the grocers. Now, we did go a little bit wider. We were trying to do grocers, just grocers, and all of a sudden it spiraled out to, we realized that it included way more than just grocers. So it's gonna be a little longer video today, but it is going to cover all the grocers, mercantiles, all kinds of things like that.
It's called Going Down the Rabbit Hole.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we definitely hope you guys enjoy that. Before we do jump into that, Brooke wanted to tell you guys about our brand new seller that we actually have in the gift shop.
Right. Yes. If you like washing yourself,
Which I hope you do.
we have some amazing soap. I have already bought 3 bars of soap, all different types of smells, and this is all locally made. So I just wanted to share. We're gonna put up her logo right now, and her name.
It's ER Designs.
Yes.
It's a great company that we've been working with. They actually showed up for a garage sale last weekend.
Yeah.
And then we fell in love with their products, and they decided that they're more than happy to sell with us here. So definitely come out and check out their soap products. I know they do more on their Facebook side. I think they do T-shirts and stuff.
Yeah.
But we have their soap products because, we thought you guys would love some, and it's made the museum sell absolutely lovely.
Yeah, they've been selling so well so far, and again, I bought some. They smell amazing. They're local. She makes them all herself. I tried it out personally, and it reacted with my skin really well. So these are really good products in my opinion. She's selling them at
$6 a piece.
$6? Okay, $6 a bar. And we'll get a couple pictures on Instagram probably.
Yep.
So you can see what they look like.
Definitely. Well, so we hope you guys enjoy the presentation today on what we'll put in quotes is grocers. You'll understand that once we get into it. And again, we're so sorry we don't have video. Hopefully we'll get that fixed for next week, and you can see our lovely faces again.
I know you miss our faces.
So you'll hear back from us together in just a little bit. We'll split the presentation a little, and we'll talk to you guys soon. The history of the grocer is a fascinating one that dates back all the way to around 1180. The oldest recorded one we can find was the Worshipful Company of Grocers, which is located in the city of London. They actually date back to their earliest records as the Guild of Pepperers, again in 1180 AD. They were people who were recognized as traders who bought and traded in spices and gold from Byzantine all the way through the Mediterranean, and often used what was called the peppercorn currency or the pepper currency. They were later officially made the controllers of the King's Beam, which is where the word grocer actually comes from. The King's Beam was known as the peso grosso, and it was the scale used for heavy goods. The Guild of Pepperers later became known as the Grocers of London. And then later in 1376 renamed themselves the Grocers Company and now run Grocers Hall. They became synonymous with your import-export businesses, and were kind of the grocer name is what was used to explain that concept up until about the 17th century. And then in the 17th century, we saw a transition over to that meaning more of a tavern or saloon until about 1850. And at that same time, a lot of merchants simply sold what they could obtain. Whether that was local produce, whether that was an item that was brought in from another area, that's what they sold. And a lot of times, once you got to the 1850s era, what we think of a grocer today would more have been referred to as a mercantile general store or emporium. They served your local populations, carrying farming implements. It was often a time where you could find food and necessities that you couldn't necessarily pick up elsewhere. And were kind of ones that were kind of a catch-all. And then after that's when you start seeing the 1850s is the rise up of the mercantile style, which is what Brooke is going to cover next.
A general store offered as a meeting place to socialize, to do business, or to gossip. It also served as mostly a town center of sorts. In the early days, you would often see post offices inside some of the general stores. And early on, it was used as a drinking establishment. So this really was more than just a simple place to do business. The front counter held display cases for smaller items, mostly made out of wood and glass. There would be a floor-to-ceiling hutch you would often see in the back. And oftentimes, because this was pre-electricity, there would be a glass storefront of sorts, but you would still have to combat against some of the darker areas of the store. Sometimes it would be damp. There would be a cash register, a merchandise weighing scale. You'd also find things such as coffee grinders, certain machinery that was needed. There was also surplus merchandise in some of these stores that was put in the cellar or the basement or possibly on the second floor, as you would see some of these 4-story floors that also would get into the wholesale business for storage. Sometimes the second floor would also be living quarters for the grocer family. Items that you would find in general stores, you would see in some of the early times, you would see more local fare with perishable goods. And as mass transit developed, and with our positioning with the railroad expansion in the early years, and also with the steamboats coming out this way, we did end up being one of the first to see goods that came in from all over the U.S. and also from overseas. So St. Joe early on was no stranger to imports and fine goods. So you would see in a general store things like we would see today, coffee, spices, baking powder, flour, sugar, sometimes tropical fruits. Fruits that we wouldn't consider tropical today, like a banana or oranges. Now, those were very prized, and we might do a segment about fruits later on if there's a demand for it. Sometimes fruit would just be like flowers. You would sit them like you would sit flowers in a vase and not even be eaten. So I'm not sure about the tropical fruits as far as if they were actually eaten. Hard candies, you would see eggs, milk, butter. And of course we did have, our regional fruits. This was the area where you would see apple groves. So they were all over the place. So whatever was local was definitely in store. You would have honey and molasses, crackers after they were invented, cheese and syrups, cigars and tobacco. You would see other things in a general store as well that you would see in a general merchandising store. Sometimes you would get clothes, you would get liquor. There was a department store feel about it. Something that I've noticed that general stores came by many names during these early years. You'd have grocers that was basically a whole umbrella of to describe a merchant selling goods and services, which we'll get into later. So it wasn't just products. There were also services as well. There was an apothecary section of the store, as you would see sometimes with our pharmacies that we have today, like CVS. Patented medicines, remedies. There were soaps and toiletries, elixirs. There were modern ones that were tested and ones that were not tested. So there were a variety of products and services that were available. And as we see in later years, with the when we have more of a selection, sometimes we'll see grocers or mercantiles that will specialize in certain goods, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But other things that would have been sold, cloth. We have a receipt from a gentleman who bought Italian cloth in yards that we'll provide you as an example later. Needles, threads, ribbons, buttons. And of course, Rachel Fleming would be a good example of that. We'll talk about her later. Pistols, ammunition, lanterns, ropes, crockery, pots and pans. So you would see even coffins sometimes in these stores. And the whole concept of how you would go about getting your items, it's not like we see today where it's self-service. Self-service actually wasn't invented until the turn of the century, about 1916, when Piggly Wiggly entered the sphere. So back in the day, if you were living then, you would go to the counter, and the guy behind the counter or the gal would get your items. You would tell them what you needed, and they would get it for you. And now you do everything yourself. So that's just a little bit about how you would go about your items. Also, you would have, in addition to local perishable goods, and then with more of the import goods that we would see, you would have the door-to-door salesmen, so to speak. And these were called drummers at the time, men that would go around and then sell merchandise to the store.
So as Brooke was saying, there are some interesting things that we see with the local grocers. I mean, that kind of that early transition period, and we kind of see a dichotomy of what grocers and general goods are. You find your wholesale companies, and then you also find your general stores. But then you also find this kind of awkward third part where it's specialty goods that do both. And they all call themselves grocers. They all call themselves dry good companies. They all call themselves the same thing across the board. And so we're going to show you guys a few images of some of these and kind of describe how they were similar, how they were different, and also kind of just how they kind of showed this transition, like Brooke talked about with the Piggly Wiggly concept in the 1920s. This transition we were going from the pepperers and then wholesale grocers to more of a retail grocer who still carried a wide array of products. And one of the first great ones that we can talk about is Hirsch Brothers.
Yeah.
So they were obviously a general goods store. I mean, you guys are seeing a picture here of the outside of their building. And they were kind of a fascinating one. Brooke, you want to tell us a little bit about kind of what made Hirsch Brothers different than some of the other ones we're going to talk about?
Yeah, we have direct evidence of Hirsch's grocery store. They were in our city directory, and we actually have a good example, a receipt from them at the time. Now, they were a dry goods and notion store that actually operated their store on 8th and Felix Street. It was a 2-story building, and so from what I could tell, Daniel and I, the store itself, since there were only 2 stories, and from what all the evidence we could gather, it was literally a store. So if it has the word store on it, it's pretty safe to say that they did sell items that they weren't in addition to a wholesale company as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We find the same thing with Conard Grocery we're going to show you a picture of.
Yeah.
And Miss Rachel Fleming that we've talked about in the past was that same type of the store, the 2-story general store, the stuff you picture from the old Western movies. That's what they are. Now, at the same time, we run into this interesting dichotomy, like I said, of pure wholesalers. And then we'll get into the hybrid ones that we found as well. A great example of that one is Tootle Campbell and S.S. Allen. Both of these were known as, they called themselves grocery or dry goods companies.
Yes.
And so they were kind of a step up even from those, where you kind of saw them selling wholesale goods instead of singular items to you at a grocery store.
And these buildings were actually several stories. So you would see ones that did wholesaling and commission, merchant. You would see at least 3 to 4 stories. And that is very similar to what you would see in the S.S. Allen Grocery Company as well as the Tootle Campbell. And I just wanted to note the S.S. Allen, they were the first to provide home delivery of groceries. So I thought that was important to note.
Yeah,
Pretty
definitely.
neat service. Yeah.
And so after you see these two, like we said, that's kind of the dichotomy you saw. If you saw the small store and you saw the big store, and of course we're going to throw up different pictures of other ones that do that. We found quite a few other stores that did the same kind of both of them. Then you get into your almost specialty goods. It's almost the way to refer to them. Ones like S.J. Carmody, J. Kenny & Co., Parker & Co., which we'll dig into each of these, and E.W. Toole. And they were kind of interesting because they were grocers, but some of them were also wholesalers. Some of them specified in very specific products.
Yeah.
And so they were almost this transition point where you were going from these individualized stores that would sell just liquor or just grain or just, what we picture as the mom and pop style stores to almost these, we kind of called it the Walmart mentality, where you could go and buy anything you wanted from these people. The first one I'd like to talk about is S.J. Carmody. And so they were a grocer and commissions market. You guys can see, merchant, as you guys can see from the picture, but they kind of specialized. Brooke, what were they specializing in?
Yeah, grain, feed, flour. So more of the staple items that people would require. And also, they were also known, like as Daniel said, as a commission merchant. So when we go into clothing commission stores today, it's very similar to what you would see back then. So they really specialized in a lot of the staples. Now, when we get down to J. Kenny, they did fancy groceries. So they were more into the teas and the liquors and the wines, and some of them were imported at that time. All of these came from our 1860 city directory. And so, like Daniel was saying, there was a dichotomy between these two styles, and lumping them all together, in definition.
Yeah. And so that, J. Kenny was such a fascinating one because they were that fancy grocers. And then you get into two that I think almost partner with each other, but in completely different ways. And you have Parker & Co., and then you also have E.W. Toole. Now, these two are interesting because they both list themselves as wholesalers and retail grocers. But they also both sold different products. Parker & Co. would talk about buying your flour, your bacon, your hams, your salted porks, your household items, what you were buying to make sure you were taken care of at home. Whereas EW and BW Toole, which were brothers, were more of into liquors and salt and whiskey and items that you weren't necessarily just going to the grocery store as a staple for. And so they kind of had this, they were both the same company style of being wholesale and retail. So you kind of get the halfway between the two.
Oh, and also wanted to note with that particular company, they also did trades for hides. So during that time, of course, we have money that's emerging. So there's money, but also trades are still a big part of the economy. And we see that with this particular example. You can see at the bottom of the screen that they still engage in trades.
Yeah.
For goods, yeah.
And so they were all kind of involved in that hybrid system that you see, which was really, like we talked about, that transition to the new way of doing business. After these guys, you saw that transition that Brooke talked about to the self-service, buy your products you need at a grocery store that sold groceries.
Yeah, and also credit emerged early on in some of these places, and one of the receipts that we have is actually a paid in full from a credit that a gentleman was paying off. So I thought that was kind of fun.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So that gives you guys a little bit of information about where were grocers, where they come from, why were they important, and what were the ones here in town. I hope you guys enjoyed some of those images. We wanted to do a larger group, but grocery stores just kind of all lumped themselves together. There was no way for us to really break them down to wholesalers versus grocers. It's kind of why it took a little longer. Last week we were trying to put together this and kind of ran into, hey, all these people are the same thing. So
yeah, I thought it was so neat to see the evolution of
Definitely.
grocers, especially from the early days, before the U.S. was even a country, and how self-service is actually changing before our eyes right
Definitely.
now. So we're going through another grocery shift in consumerism, I would say.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us here today. We're not going to be able to do a sign off today. The camera is not playing very nice right now, but we hope you enjoyed the Facebook Live today. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you.
Bye.